course, timber plantations impacts on the social environment, not just because it does not provide a lot of jobs, but also because it sort of removes us from nature in a way. All of these mountains, millions of hectares, used to be covered in natural grassland where you could find natural animals, where you could find the oribi. Oribi is South Africa's most threatened bug species. It lives in these high altitude moist grasslands, now almost completely covered in timber plantations. Rudd's lark, that's South Africa's most threatened bird species, lives in these high altitude moist grasslands, now almost completely transformed to industrial timber plantations. So it removes that element of nature and our awareness of nature to the extent that we had it. GeaSphere has operations here in South Africa. We also have coordinator in Swaziland, in Greeff, and we have coordinator in Mozambique, Vera Ribeiro. We are worried about Mozambique because that seems to be the area into which industry want to expand. There's already a couple of huge projects underway, and that's where these massive industrial timber plantations are being established. So we can see here in South Africa that timber plantations leads to very many and serious environmental and social impacts, and we would want to see the development in Mozambique be much more responsible, so that you keep out of the wetlands, stay out of the riparian zones, leave huge open conservation corridors. Don't plant timber plantations like in a blanket fashion, covering the hills and the mountains of some regions. Of course, these timber plantations are linked to the massive pulp mills and the global paper and pulp trade. Much of the timber being produced here is for export purposes, to fulfill the overconsumption of countries in the north. Here in South Africa, on average, we use around 50 kilograms of paper per person per year, which is still much too much. But in countries like Japan and Germany and the United States, it's more than 300 kilograms of paper per person. And it's not because the Europeans are reading so much and that they're so clever. No, it is because there's this absolute waste of paper and pulp products, which most of it ends up in the landfill. So when we talk about opposing industrial timber plantations, we also must oppose this model of based upon overconsumption that we see throughout the world. Now, linked to this, of course, is these massive paper and pulp mills. Close to us is Sapinongodwana. It's the biggest pulp mill in Africa. Produces more than 500,000 tons of pulp annually. Also leads to a lot of pollution issues. It's smokestacks blowing smoke into the air all the time. Huge amounts of chemicals being flushed down the Elands River. When there's a lot of water in the river, there's enough dilution capacity to sort of solve the problem of chlorides in the water, because the chlorides gets sort of diluted to such an extent that it doesn't cause such a huge problem. But in the dry winter months, when there's less water in the river, it becomes a huge problem, because farmers need water of a certain quality. If there's too much chloride in their water, they cannot utilize it. There's been a couple of intense chemical spills into the Elands River, into the Crocodile River, where thousands of fish have died. The Sapinongodwana recently put in a proposal to expand the factory by more than 70%. But in the initial documents that they sent out, they state there quite blatantly that they will not be providing a single extra job opportunity. So what kind of development is that in a country where we sit with almost 50% unemployment, 40% unemployment? We need developments which provides jobs. So you cannot expand 70% your massive operation but not provide a single extra job opportunity. It's not the kind of development that we need. But it just goes to show how little employment opportunity really there is throughout this industry. Another thing is that many of the timber plantations or the timber plantation companies that operate in this area are basically multinational corporations, like SAPI, South African Paper and Pulp Industry. Most of their shareholders are in the UK, York Timber, Anglo-American. So you see that timber plantations, the real benefits don't come down to the people on the ground. If there's benefits in a share price, then that goes to the international shareholders more than to the people on the ground who's operating the chainsaws. 80% of South Africa's timber plantations, despite the fact that they have these massive impacts on the water, massive impacts on biodiversity, massive impacts on the soil, long-term sustainability, huge impacts on social structure and culture in the areas where they are planted, they are FSC certified. FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, is an organization that was set up about 14 years ago, designed to look after the world's remaining forests. So they would have certifiers that goes to forest areas. They would see that the forests are responsibly harvested and managed, and then they would give it the FSC green stamp of approval. And then it would allow the consumers in the north particularly to buy the product with a clear conscience. So we ask the question, how can 80% of South Africa's industrial timber plantations be certified as responsibly managed forests? Timber plantation is not a forest, it's a monoculture. When you think of a forest, you think of many different kinds of trees and plants and animals and birds and insects and microorganisms which inhabit the forest. Timber plantations are monocultures, and monocultures deplete long-term soil sustainability. So how can they be certified as responsibly managed forests? FSC, according to their criteria, the timber trees utilized should not be invasive. You can see driving through this area and through the whole country, basically, that these industrial timber plantation trees utilized, the pines, the eucalypts especially, wattle trees, incredibly invasive, and it's a huge problem in this general area where if we don't remove and continue removing these jungle gum and pine trees where they come up in the natural environment, they will just take over completely. The problem is that the trees haven't got natural predators, so they have a huge advantage above the indigenous trees and the indigenous plants. So where they get an opportunity, they take over completely. So they're incredibly invasive. How can they be FSC certified? We don't think these trees should be FSC certified. If you want to certify them, you can certify them as a responsibly managed plantation, and then according to strict criteria. But don't fool the world and saying that timber plantations are forests. They are not forests. They're not sustainable. We believe that the monoculture element is absolutely wrong. We need to get a model back which is based upon diversity, because you need a diversity of input to produce healthy soils which is alive and sustainable and which can feed generations into the future. Grassland sequesters more and absorbs more carbon from the atmosphere than timber plantations. And much of the carbon is taken underground by organisms such as termites. So build up a carbon reserve underground. So grasslands are very effective at carbon sequestration, at the absorption of carbon. And of course, when we destroy the grassland, we destroy that biodiversity, we destroy all of those natural cycles, and we have a massive impact on the natural environment, which filters through to the social environment, because we people need a healthy natural environment for our very own existence.